The smell of blood mixed with hot sand invaded your nostrils as 70,000 voices roared around you, deciding whether you would live or die in the next few minutes. This wasn't a Hollywood fantasy, but the brutal reality that hundreds of thousands of men faced for nearly 4 centuries in the heart of the Roman Empire. The question few dare to ask is simple but terrifying. Would you have what it takes to survive as a gladiator in Rome's Colosseum? The story we know about gladiators is full of romantic myths and cinematic distortions that hide a much more complex and darker truth. Behind the supposed glory and honor lay a calculatedly ruthless system, designed to turn men into machines of deadly entertainment. But there were also codes of honor, survival strategies, and a social hierarchy that few truly understand. Today, you'll discover not only what life as a gladiator was really like, but also whether you possess the physical, mental, and emotional qualities necessary to survive in this world where death was the main spectacle. Prepare for a revelation that will completely change your perception of one of the most fascinating periods in human history. If this type of content piques your curiosity, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button to support the creation of more videos like this. Your support is crucial for us to continue exploring history's most intriguing mysteries. Now, let me take you inside the bowels of the Roman Colosseum, where the line between life and death was decided by the roar of the crowd and the blade of a sword. To understand whether you would survive as a gladiator, we first need to completely destroy the romanticized image that Hollywood has created about these warriors. The Roman Colosseum, whose construction was begun by Emperor Vespasian in 72 AD and completed by his son Titus 8 years later, wasn't just an entertainment arena, but the epicenter of a complex political, social, and economic system that defined Roman imperial power. When you step into the arena for the first time, you're not entering a simple stadium, but the largest amphitheater ever built by humankind, 188 meters long, 156 meters wide, and 50 meters high. Its subterranean structures, known as the hypogeum, formed a labyrinth of corridors, cells, weapons depots, and elevator systems that allowed wild animals, elaborate sets, and even aquatic backdrops to magically appear in the arena, creating a spectacle that defied reality itself. But what really matters for your survival isn't the impressive dimensions of the building, but understanding that you wouldn't just be a fighter, you'd be a piece in a much larger political game. Gladiatorial games weren't free entertainment offered by benevolent emperors, but rather a calculated tool of social control known as panem et circenses, bread and circuses. Keeping the Roman population fed and distracted was key to preventing revolts and maintaining the empire's stability. As a gladiator, you would become part of an extremely lucrative business controlled by entrepreneurs called lanistas, who bought, trained, and rented gladiators to the organizers of the games. Your life would have a specific monetary value, calculated based on your skills, experience, and entertainment potential. This brutal economic reality would determine every aspect of your existence, from the quality of food you'd receive to the type of opponent you'd face in the arena. To truly understand your chances of survival as a gladiator, we need to delve deep into the Roman world of the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, when the Colosseum was at its peak and gladiatorial games represented the pinnacle of imperial entertainment. Rome during this period wasn't just a city, but the beating heart of an empire that stretched from the mists of Britain to the sands of the Syrian desert, ruling over 60 million people through a complex network of legions, roads, and aqueducts that defied the geographical limitations known until then. Roman society was rigidly and ruthlessly stratified, divided between Roman citizens, Latins, foreigners, and slaves, each category with specific rights and obligations that completely determined a person's fate. As a gladiator, you would likely be a slave, a prisoner of war, a convicted criminal, or, in rarer cases, a free man who voluntarily chose this profession for financial reasons or the pursuit of glory. This origin would determine not only how you'd be treated, but also your real possibilities of survival and eventual freedom. The emperor who ruled during the height of the gladiatorial games was a quasi-divine figure, venerated as the son of the gods and possessed of absolute power over the life and death of all his subjects. Trajan, who ruled from 98 to 117 AD, organized games that lasted 123 consecutive days, involving more than 10,000 gladiators and 11,000 wild beasts. Hadrian, his successor, not only continued this tradition but expanded it, building amphitheaters in several provinces of the empire and establishing specific regulations for combat that would directly influence your chances of survival. But the true masters of your destiny would be the lanistas, shrewd businessmen who turned gladiature into a highly organized and profitable industry. These entrepreneurs operated gladiatorial schools called ludus, where you would spend years of your life training, living, and preparing for combat. The most famous of these establishments was the Ludus Magnus, connected directly to the Colosseum by an underground tunnel, where the most skilled and valuable gladiators received specialized training under the supervision of former veteran gladiators known as doctors. Your training would begin before dawn, when the first rays of sunlight illuminated the central courtyard of the ludus. You'd be awakened by the sound of whips and shouts from the guards, who wouldn't tolerate any sign of laziness or resistance. Your first meal of the day would consist mostly of cooked barley, beans, and occasionally a piece of lower quality meat, a diet designed to provide enough energy for intense training while keeping costs low to maximize the Lanista's profits. The doctors who would oversee your training were men scarred by the brutal experience of the arena, survivors who had won their freedom through years of bloody victories. These instructors weren't just teachers of combat techniques, but intuitive psychologists who deeply understood the mindset required to kill another human being while tens of thousands of spectators screamed for blood. They would teach you not only how to wield a sword or handle a shield, but how to control the paralyzing fear that would inevitably arise when you first heard the deafening roar of the Roman crowd. The first crucial aspect of your survival would be determining what kind of gladiator you become, a decision based on your physique, personality, and natural abilities. If you were tall and muscular, you might be trained as a murmillo, equipped with a large rectangular shield, a crested helmet, and a short sword called a gladius. If you were more agile and quicker, you might become a retiarius, fighting with a net, a trident, and only a shield on your left arm, relying completely on speed and technique to compensate for your limited armor. Each gladiator category possessed specific advantages and disadvantages that would dramatically influence your chances of survival. The secutors were trained specifically to hunt the retiarius, using smooth helmets that couldn't be caught by the net and curved shields that deflected attacks from the trident. The Thraex fought with curved swords and small shields, relying on agility and fast attack techniques that could be devastating against slower opponents, but fatal against gladiators with better protection. During your first few months of training, you'd discover that gladiature was much more than simply learning how to fight. You needed to develop a deep understanding of the psychology of the Roman crowd, learning how to interpret the moods of the spectators and use this information to influence the outcome of combat. A skilled gladiator knew exactly when to show courage, when to display calculated fear, and when to appeal to the mercy of the audience in a way that would increase their chances of survival. The relationship between gladiators wasn't only one of deadly competition, but also of camaraderie forged in shared suffering. You would live, eat, and train alongside men who could be your opponents in the arena within weeks. This reality created complex emotional bonds that made each combat not only a fight for physical survival, but also a psychological battle against your own feelings of loyalty and humanity. Ludus veterans would teach you the unwritten secrets of gladiatorial survival, how to interpret an opponent's subtle signals to anticipate their attacks, how to use the arena itself to your advantage by exploiting differences in the texture of the sand or the position of the sun, and how to manage your energy during prolonged combat to maintain enough strength for the decisive final blow. Most importantly, they would teach you how to die with dignity should defeat be inevitable, a skill that could turn certain death into a display of courage that would touch the hearts of the crowd and possibly save your life. Your first actual combat would be preceded by specific rituals that served both to honor the gods and to psychologically prepare the gladiators for the possibility of death. You would attend a special banquet the night before, where you'd have the opportunity to eat better than at any other time since your arrival at the ludus. This feast, known as the Cena Libera, was an ancient tradition that allowed gladiators to make their last will and say goodbye to their companions, openly acknowledging that some would never return. On the morning of combat, you'd be awakened before dawn to participate in specific religious ceremonies, offering sacrifices to the gods of war and fortune, especially to Mars and Fortuna, asking for protection and strength for the impending confrontation. These ceremonies weren't mere formalities, but essential components of the mental preparation necessary to face imminent death with the composure required by Roman culture. The process of equipping yourself for combat was itself an elaborate ritual, with each piece of armor being carefully inspected by experts who ensured that the equipment was in perfect condition, but also balanced in such a way that no gladiator had an unfair advantage over another. This attention to detail wasn't motivated by concerns for fairness, but by the need to ensure that the combats were exciting and unpredictable, maximizing entertainment for the Roman audience. When you would finally emerge from the underground tunnel that connected the ludus to the Colosseum, you'd be confronted with a sensory spectacle that would challenge all your senses simultaneously. The roar of 70,000 Roman voices would create a wall of sound that you'd physically feel in your chest, while the intense smell of hot sand mixed with dried blood and human sweat would invade your nostrils, and the sunlight reflected off the white marble bleachers would create an almost blinding glare that would make it difficult to distinguish individual faces in the crowd. This overwhelming sensory experience would be just the beginning of an ordeal that would test not only your physical combat skills, but also your ability to maintain concentration and strategy under extreme pressure. Survival in the arena would depend on your ability to block out external distractions and focus completely on the opponent in front of you. A task that would become infinitely more difficult when you realize that tens of thousands of people were literally betting money on your death or survival. The moment you first stepped onto the sand of the Colosseum would represent the climax of months or even years of preparation, but also the beginning of a reality that no training could truly simulate. The arena itself was a masterpiece of engineering specifically designed to maximize both the visual spectacle and the deadly efficiency of combat. The floor was covered with a thick layer of sand specially imported from Egypt, chosen not only for its ability to absorb blood quickly, but also for creating a surface that offered enough traction for quick movements without becoming slippery when wet. When combat officially began, marked by the sound of trumpets and the ritual cry of the gladiators, Ave, Caesar, morituri te salutant. A phrase that, contrary to popular belief, wasn't uttered regularly, but reserved for special occasions, you'd find that all your prior preparation would be tested by the unpredictable factors that only the real arena could present. The intense heat of the Mediterranean sun, reflected and amplified by the surrounding marble structures, would create extreme physical conditions that would drain your energy much more quickly than any training session in the ludus. Your opponent, carefully chosen by the organizers of the games to create maximum drama and uncertainty, would pose not only a physical threat but also a psychological challenge. Someone who had gone through the same brutal process of preparation as you. The shocking reality that many don't understand about gladiatorial combats is that they rarely ended in immediate death. Modern statistics based on archaeological evidence and historical records suggest that only 1 in 10 engagements resulted in the death of one of the participants. A surprisingly low mortality rate considering the apparent brutality of the spectacle. This relatively high survival rate wasn't the result of Roman compassion or humanity, but rather of pragmatic economic considerations. A trained gladiator represented a considerable investment for his owner, and killing him needlessly meant destroying valuable capital that had cost years of food, training, and medical care to develop. The combats were designed to be thrilling and bloody, but not necessarily fatal, a crucial distinction that could mean the difference between life and death for you. Roman audiences, unlike modern cinematic representations, were sophisticated connoisseurs who appreciated technique, courage, and skill as much as brute violence. They could distinguish between a well-executed blow and a desperate attack, between genuine courage and disguised cowardice, between a gladiator who deserved to live and another who had disgraced the arena with his performance. This sophistication of the audience meant that your survival would depend not only on winning fights, but on winning them in a way that would impress and thrill viewers who had watched thousands of previous fights. During combat, you'd find that physical energy management was just as crucial as technical skill. The more experienced gladiators developed elaborate strategies to conserve strength during the first few minutes of the encounter, allowing less experienced opponents to exhaust themselves prematurely through furious but inefficient attacks. This calculating approach turned every combat into a deadly chess game, where patience and strategic intelligence often triumphed over brute force or impulsive aggressiveness. Interaction with the crowd during combat was an art in itself, a form of participatory theater where you'd need to constantly read the collective mood of the spectators and adjust your performance accordingly. A skilled gladiator knew exactly when to make dramatic pauses to allow tension to build, when to show wounds to arouse sympathy, and when to display courageous defiance to inspire admiration. These theatrical skills weren't superficial adornments to martial competence, but essential components of survival that could literally save your life when combat came to an end. The most critical moment of any gladiatorial combat would come when one of the fighters was clearly defeated but still remained alive. At this moment, the fate of the defeated would be decided through a complex process that involved both the emperor and the crowd, but which often depended on the overall impression that the gladiator had made during his performance. A fighter who had shown exceptional courage, superior technique, or dignity in defeat would often receive the missus, permission to leave the arena alive, even after a clear defeat. If you were the winner, you'd find that victory brought both rewards and new challenges. Successful gladiators received monetary prizes, better accommodations in the ludus, superior quality food, and, most importantly, fame that could spread throughout the empire. This fame, in turn, increased your commercial value and created pressure for even more spectacular performances in future matches, establishing a cycle where initial success often led to expectations that were impossible to maintain. The psychological reality of killing another human being in combat, especially in front of an enthusiastic crowd, created deep traumas that few gladiators could properly process. Veterans of the arena often developed compulsive behaviors, addictions to alcohol or hallucinogenic substances, and a specific form of emotional desensitization that helped them function in the brutal environment of the ludus, but made them unsuited to any form of normal life outside of gladiature. The possibility of gaining freedom through gladiature, symbolized by the delivery of the rudis, a wooden sword that represented honorable retirement, was real, but statistically remote. Most gladiators who survived long enough to qualify for freedom found that their skills were so valuable that their owners preferred to offer better and better conditions to keep them active, rather than lose them completely. This reality created a cruel dilemma where success in the arena often prolonged captivity rather than hastening liberation. Gladiators who eventually won their freedom faced enormous adaptive challenges as they tried to reintegrate into normal Roman society. Their specialized skills were of little value outside of the gladiatorial context, and the social stigmatization associated with the profession made it difficult to establish normal relationships or find respectable employment. Many freedmen ended up voluntarily returning to the arena as instructors or entrepreneurs, finding that the world they had tried to leave behind was the only place where they truly belonged. The complex social structure surrounding gladiatorial games also included an elaborate hierarchy of supporters, sponsors, and organizers that directly influenced each gladiator's chances of survival. Ambitious senators often funded spectacular games as a way to gain political popularity, and their personal preferences for certain types of combat or specific gladiators could determine who would receive easier opponents or superior equipment. The superstitions and religious rituals that permeated gladiatorial culture created an additional layer of psychological complexity that affected both wrestlers and spectators. Gladiators developed personal charms, specific pre-combat routines, and beliefs about auspicious or unfavorable days that profoundly influenced their confidence and performance in the arena. These practices weren't mere cultural curiosities, but essential elements of the mental support system that enabled men to repeatedly face the imminent possibility of death. The medical aspect of gladiature was surprisingly advanced by the standards of the time, with specialized physicians called medici, who developed sophisticated techniques to treat combat wounds, set broken bones, and prevent infections that were often more deadly than the original wounds. These medical professionals were motivated not only by humanity, but by the economic need to preserve valuable investments and keep competitive gladiators in condition to fight again as quickly as possible. The diet and fitness regimens of gladiators were based on empirical knowledge developed over centuries of practical experience. Different types of gladiators were given specific dietary programs designed to optimize their particular physical characteristics. Retiarii were given more fish and light foods to maintain agility, while Myrmilones consumed more red meat and grains to develop muscle mass and endurance. This level of nutritional expertise demonstrates how much gladiature had evolved from a simple bloodthirsty spectacle to a complex science of optimizing human performance. As the years passed and you racked up victories, you'd find that gladiatorial fame created unexpected opportunities, but also unique dangers. Popular gladiators often received advances from wealthy women of the Roman aristocracy, attracted by the dangerous combination of brutal masculinity and proximity to death that made them irresistibly exotic. These relationships, while offering temporary comforts and occasionally escape routes from gladiature, also created political complications that could result in more dangerous opponents being deliberately selected to eliminate gladiators who would become inconveniently influential. After diving deep into the brutal and complex reality of gladiatorial life, the original question remains suspended in the air like a sword about to fall. Would you really survive as a gladiator in the Roman Colosseum? The honest answer is that your chances would depend much less on your physical strength or personal courage than on factors completely beyond your control. Your social background, the specific historical period in which you lived, the quality of the lanista who owned you, and most importantly, your ability to navigate a political and social system infinitely more complex than any individual combat in the arena. The most disturbing truth about Roman gladiature is that it represented an extreme version of dynamics that we still recognize in our modern society. Just as gladiators were turned into entertainment to keep the Roman masses distracted from deeper political and economic problems, our contemporary culture has created its own forms of bread and circuses that fulfill strikingly similar social functions. Modern professional sports, while obviously less deadly, operate according to economic and psychological principles that Roman lanistas would immediately recognize. Turning human beings into spectacle, creating artificial tribal loyalties, and generating enormous profits through the commercialization of human conflict. Most importantly, the gladiatorial experience reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature that transcend any specific historical period. The ability of the Roman crowd to roar for blood while simultaneously admiring courage and technique demonstrates the fundamental duality that exists in all of us, the constant tension between our most primitive impulses and our highest aspirations. When you imagine yourself in that arena, surrounded by 70,000 voices deciding your fate, you're confronting not just a historical setting, but a mirror that reflects the darkest and most contradictory aspects of the universal human condition. Survival in the Roman arena required a specific form of wisdom that our modern age rarely develops: the ability to fully accept the constant proximity of death while simultaneously struggling with all your might to preserve life. This paradoxical acceptance wasn't passive resignation, but rather a form of mental clarity that allowed the most successful gladiators to operate at maximum efficiency under extreme pressure, a skill that could be incredibly valuable in any age or circumstance. The most fascinating and disturbing aspect of gladiatorial culture was its ability to turn brutality into art, death into entertainment, and suffering into spectacle, without ever completely losing a code of honor that valued courage, dignity, and technical excellence. This transformation reveals something profound about the human capacity to find meaning and beauty even in the most extreme circumstances. A lesson that resonates powerfully in our own era of conflict, challenge, and uncertainty. If you were really transported to that arena, you'd find that your greatest battle wouldn't be against opponents armed with swords and shields, but against your own mental and emotional limitations. Gladiator was, fundamentally, a test of character conducted under the most extreme conditions imaginable, and the true winners weren't necessarily those who killed the most enemies, but those who managed to retain their essential humanity while operating in a system designed to destroy it. The final lesson that emerges from this historical exploration is that survival, whether in an ancient Roman arena or in the complex challenges of modern life, depends less on individual strength than on the ability to understand and navigate the larger systems that surround us. The gladiators who lived the longest and won the most victories were those who understood that they were participating in a game far greater than any single combat, a game with hidden rules, invisible alliances, and consequences that extended far beyond the walls of the Colosseum. So, would you survive as a gladiator in the Roman Colosseum? Perhaps the most important question is whether you could keep your soul intact while your body struggled for survival, whether you could find meaning and purpose in circumstances that seem designed to destroy both, and whether you'd have the wisdom to recognize that some victories cost more than some defeats. Because in the end, the gladiators who really won weren't necessarily those who made it out of the arena alive, but those who managed to turn an experience of extreme dehumanization into an ultimate demonstration of human dignity. If you've made it this far and aren't subscribed yet, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share in the comments whether you believe you'd have what it takes to survive as a Roman gladiator.